Hello, everybody, and welcome to another adventure in history. I'm your host. My name is Shane. I hope you're having a great day. Welcome, everybody. Cave Geek says, another viewer request stream that has to do with Israel/Judaism. Someone's got an unhealthy obsession, methinks. I don't know. Maybe it's just an interesting topic, and because I've been able to, thread the needle so far of being factual without being offensive, maybe this has become that good old, hashtag safe place for discussion. Get on with it! We just started. I'm still in the opening spiel. Just get to the topic. What's up, Foggage? Good to see you. Hey, Batbird, how's it going? Yeah, just go ahead. Just dive in. I want to know about a book. Oh, man. So the show is Adventures in History, where we talk about stuff that is historical in nature, and we try to have some fun along the way, and we talk about the stuff very frequently that doesn't really get covered in the history classes that you might have had. Because a lot of the stuff that gets covered is, just very surface level, and it's very frequently influenced by politics and region. But the world is a big place, and it all sort of fits together over the course of history, and I think it's kind of important to know what's going on in other parts of the world. And it'll help us to understand other people's cultures and how the things, kind of function and operate. So, what's up, Gentiles? I don't know if we can apply that evenly across the board. I would say that I am almost certainly a Gentile. I don't have any Jewish. Well, so here's the if we go far enough back into my family history, I do have a matrilineal ancestor that lived in Spain that married into the British family that was my, this is probably like 7-8 generations ago, so it's pretty far back. But there is a possibility that that Spanish lady might have had a Jewish descendant at some point in her life. So that would be probably, 15 to 20. It's far enough back that I can't count it. And I am not Jewish by religion, so I think it's pretty comfortable to classify me as a Gentile. Am I not offensive, or have the offended people left my audience? Well, that's a fair question. Maybe I'm not actually as inoffensive as I think. Maybe it's just that I'm driving away people that don't want to correct me. And that's a completely possible situation. I feel like I've tried my best to be impartial about things, especially history topics. If we start getting in the opinion hat, I put the opinion hat on, right? I don't see how curiosity and the pursuit of knowledge is an unhealthy obsession. Well, there we go. At least your grandfather married a... No, that is not the case. Nobody in my family married a Native American princess, but everybody in my area's grandfather did that, as if Native American princesses were just able to be obtained at the Native American princess store, which doesn't even cogitate, because by the time our ancestors would have been moving to this region of the country, there weren't any tribes down here that had kings, which sort of predicates the concept of having a princess, right? You kind of have to have one to have the other. So yeah, methinks some people might have been lied to, which is, heritage-wise, not an uncommon thing. But hello, everybody. Hi, Foggage. I think I said hey already, but, why not say it again? Hey, Vipers, good to see you. To be fair, at some point down the line, everybody will have a princess as an ancestor. I would like to say that the law of large numbers agrees with that, but I'm not really sure. I don't know if we can necessarily say that. I don't know if we can absolutely verify that across the board. Because there have been a lot more people that are not noble than a lot more people that have been noble. and I'm using noble here as like the official term. I think everybody has nobility in their own right, right? I'm not a big fan of like certain families just being specialer than others. I mean, they're mixing. That's true, and the law of big numbers would seem to be on your side. I just don't know if that's 100% certain or not. It would be interesting to see, though. It would be an interesting thing to see. How many husbands did Pocahontas have? 3 or 2? Either 2 or 3. John Rolfe was actually the first one. Miscegenating, right? They is having children's. Okay, so yeah. So this is a viewer request night. This is a topic that had origins in the viewers like you. And at the end of tonight, we will be picking via poll our next viewer request topic. So if you're interested in having an idea picked, you can hang around and we'll do a little bit of voting. What up, Tuna? How's it going, my friend? And, get your ideas sort of gestating and germinating and percolating up there, and maybe get that out in the list. And who knows, you might pick the next topic. What's up, KP? So, we're talking tonight about the Talmud, which is an interesting document that is really important to the Jewish faith. That is not something that a lot of people, particularly, I would suspect, have a lot of native knowledge on. And this is not necessarily because it's some sort of super secret document that is kept under lock and key. There are multiple website translations that you can find readily. If you just go to Google and type Talmud, you can go to multiple websites that have the whole thing translated into English, and you can scroll through the whole thing. And I'll even maybe read some tonight if we get to a point where we've got some time and I'm not completely hoarse from talking so much. But it's not something that a lot of people just go after. You sort of have to be interested in this area of religion, or specifically in Judaism, to probably even be what we might consider vaguely familiar with the Talmud. And if you are not a Jewish scholar or in the Jewish faith, or somebody that is, actively interested in this, you're probably not really going to know too terribly much about the Talmud. And that's okay, right? It's not something that everybody must know. But I was asked, I've studied this and the particular situations from which it came quite extensively in my historical travels and my sort of process of getting here. So I feel like I could talk about this thing and not be too far off the mark. So yeah, that's what we're going to talk about. Your great-great-grandmother was a Talmud princess. Well, Cave, if anybody had a claim that they could make to that nature, it would absolutely be you. Your second cousin twice removed was Johnny Cash. I think I've actually heard that story, and I'm pretty sure that you've showed me the proof that that's the actual case. I don't know if I'm related to anybody that is immediately recognizable. I am related to people that did things that were in groups that are recognizable. For example, one of my ancestors was on the Mayflower, and if you've ever heard of Squanto, the Native American that stayed in the little village of Plymouth with the Pilgrims, when Squanto stayed in Plymouth, he actually stayed at my ancestor's house. So that guy's name was Stephen Hopkins, by the way, if you're just super interested. You suspect that you're a little Jewish based on the fact that you don't believe in God. Oh, now let's try to keep the broad stroke statements about stuff like that maybe to a minimum. I understand that they're coming out of haha, but it might not always be taken out of haha. You're famous in small circles. I don't even know if I'm famous in small circles. KP is a Johnny Cash princess. There we go. My great-great-grandmother and Johnny Cash's dad were brother and sister. That's it. There we go. Okay. So, the Talmud. It's a book. But before we get to actually talking about what the Talmud is, we kind of have to talk about where it came from. And this is going to be a bit of something that would look like a really big detour. And until we actually get to the end of what might look like a detour, you might not understand that it actually is something that we needed to cover. But we have to start this discussion with talking about the Jewish law, because ultimately the Talmud is a book that is used to interpret Jewish law. And that is its primary purpose, and it's still being used in many Jewish circles to do that today. But why did you need such a book in the first place? This is sort of the question that we have to ask when we even need to talk about the Talmud in the first place. Like, why do we need a book that interprets the law? Wasn't there a law sort of at the beginning in the first place? And there was. The original Jewish law is based on, according to the Jewish scriptures, the Ten Commandments. These, of course, are the tablets that Moses received from the God Yahweh. That's also the God of the Christians and then the God of Muslims. Now, of course, they don't all agree on that, but, that's neither here nor there. It's effectively comes from the same tradition. They're called Judeo-Christian religions, right? For real, who needs books anyway? I do. If I was told I could not read another book for the rest of my life, I would be really sad. I honestly do not know what would happen in my life if I could not read another book. Well, you see, in the Second Temple era Judaism, we're going to get there. we're getting there, KP. That's a little bit down the road. But yeah, we'll talk about the Second Temple period. So, the Ten Commandments are the basis of the Jewish law. And if we read the Jewish scripture, we are told that they were kept in a specific box called the Ark of the Covenant. And we all know that the Ark of the Covenant looks like this, because it was designed such by Steven Spielberg and the props department, and that's ultimately what it looks like. Right? Even if we found it today, it would look like that because Indiana Jones and Raiders of the Lost Ark can do no wrong. Actually, I just read an article today that talked about some really creepy discussions that were had at the beginning of this particular movie when they were plotting the script out. So there we go. This, of course, is from the actual movie, but the box here that is supposed to represent the Ark of the Covenant is based on the description of the Ark of the Covenant that was in the Jewish scripture. So we don't know exactly what it looked like, because the thing about it is that they were put in there with some other stuff, and then the Ark basically leaves the historical record about 500 BC or so. The early 500s, and remember, when we're doing BC or BCE, whatever you want to call it, we're going backwards. So the early 500s is like the 580s. And the late 500s is like the 50s, right? Like 501. Right? So the problem that we have with determining exactly the veracity of these is that they don't exist anymore according to just about all traditions, unless you're those Ethiopian people that claim that they have the Ark of the Covenant, but they won't even touch it or look at it because they think that they would be struck dead by God. So they say they have the Ark of the Covenant. They don't show it to anybody. There's not necessarily conclusive proof that it's there. Most likely, the Ark of the Covenant doesn't exist anymore, and the original Ten Commandments are lost, so we have to take Jewish scripture's word on what they are, right? So what do we use next? Well, in the Jewish scripture, I've referred to this several times, but there are a specific set of books called the Torah. And this is a book that, or a collection of books that you might be more familiar with. So the Torah are, if you are more familiar with the Christian Bible, these would be the first 5 books of the Christian Bible. The Torah is not organized in the same order that the Christian Bible is, but the Torah are the books that represent Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, if you're familiar. And they all have, of course, Hebrew names that are different, but I felt like most people would probably recognize them by the English names, so I decided to use that there. But be aware, those books do have original Hebrew titles that are not the same as Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, etc. You can only read the tablets from here on out, not the Apple ones. Ooh. R2-D2 and C-3PO are right behind Indy in that scene. Maybe. I have an Ark of the Covenant. Oh, where is it? It moved to Canada. Just like the girlfriend at the end of season, or the Stranger Things season 3. She's we're going to contact her on our radio system, right? The original tablets got thrown at a party by Charlton Heston. I've heard that he did have some ragers. Book of Moses 1. Right, that's more or less what they're talking about. So these books called the Torah, they are traditionally held to have been written by a very prominent early Jewish figure named Moses. So this is the guy that's in the movie Ten Commandments. This is the guy that was, in the army, or not the army, but the Egyptian government. He's the "Let my people go" person, and he was a very prominent leader in early Judaism. And he supposedly wrote the books of the Torah over the course of his life. Now, this is where archaeology and textual criticism are not really going to be able to agree with the tradition. So the tradition states that Moses wrote all of these. Textual critics are not going to agree on that at all. In fact, if Moses were a real person around the time that he said he would, that would have placed the completion of the Torah's basically writing down phase somewhere between 1200 and 1100 BC or BCE. And it's almost certain that these particular books weren't even finalized until probably around the 300s BC, BCE. Most of them were probably written down by the time we get to the like the 600s, the turn of the 600s to the 500s BCE. But the versions that exist today are almost all going to be kind of finalized or ratified or organized around that time. Since then, the Torah has been passed down from generation to generation through a process of osmosis. Now, that's very clever. I particularly care for that one. I don't think he wrote the part where it says he died. Mac, that is a great question, and that actually does come up in a lot of Torah Torah discussion. So if you look at a lot of the Jewish literature, if you know anything about the particular story, especially at the end of the book of Deuteronomy, Moses dies, and his body is taken by God and hidden in a secret burial spot. And most Jewish scholars are going to hold that his sort of next in command, a guy named Joshua, is actually going to be the person who pens the final few chapters, or the story of Moses' death and burial and subsequent leading off into the Holy Land. He's going to be the author of that. Now, this is sort of mimicked by the fact that in the Christian Bible, Deuteronomy is immediately followed by the book of Joshua, so there's sort of a traditional historical link between the two. But Joshua, the book, is not technically considered part of the Torah, though he might be credited with the last few chapters of Deuteronomy. Thank you for calling me out on that, and I absolutely appreciate that as a reminder. Heretical apostates. Hashtag spoilers. You're ruining the story. I mean, everybody gets old and dies, right? That's kind of what happens. So, if we're looking at the Torah itself, when we're trying to find a complete version of the Torah, the oldest version that we have is actually this image right here. So this is the oldest Torah scroll that is the complete Torah. So this is all of the books. And it's actually, until very, very recently, was still being used in a Jewish Jewish synagogue in Italy. And when it was carbon dated, it dates back to about the 1200s AD. So this is about somewhere between an 800 and a 900-year-old document. So this is written on what's called vellum, which is not paper. It's actually animal skin, probably sheepskin, that has been scraped very, very thin. So it's kind of like a very thin version of leather, but of course that makes it much more durable than just paper. But again, until very recently, this Torah was actually still being used in the synagogue. And you can see here, if we zoom in, the writing is still incredibly well preserved for something that is so old. That vellum is so hot right now. It really is. Our oldest copy is all Babylonianed up. Too new for my taste. It is all Babylonianed up. And that's a reference to a few different particular things. One of them being specifically the Babylonian Aramaic script, which, if you all know Mac in a lab coat, which I doubt that many of you do, he and I have had rather long discussions about exactly what that means, and I don't know if we necessarily agree, but there is a particular way that is written that is considered Babylonian. Vellum actually stays more preserved the more you use it. Indeed. So it doesn't get brittle. It's kind of like it doesn't dry rot. Like if you're working it and moving it around, it actually stays a lot leather. Yeah, so there we go. It's leather, so it's skin oil. There we go. Old Hebrew was so much easier to read. Well, now we don't even have Babylonian Hebrew. We have the new version of Hebrew. So there we go. Anyway. If you think I'm on a roll, wait till you see the Torah. There you go. All right, Sci-Fi, how's it going? Welcome. So, we have the Torah. And what does the Torah do? Well, if you have ever read these books, or if you haven't read these books, basically, the Torah books are going to expound upon the law. So the original law is, again, the Ten Commandments, but these are pretty direct statements, like, don't murder. But then somebody goes, well, is this murder? And somebody might go, I don't know. Is that murder or is that not murder? Is this coveting or is this not coveting? So what the original Torah scrolls, which sometimes, by the way, are just referred to as the law scrolls, what they do is they take those 10 commandments and they expand on how you are supposed to use those 10 commandments, right? So this is like a user's manual for the 10 commandments. And of course, it also tells the history of the Jewish people, their covenants with God. It describes all of the troubles and travails that they have experienced, the miraculous things that God did for them, etc. But primarily, one of the things that gets focused on a lot, especially after they are introduced, is this law. So the book of Leviticus and especially the book of Deuteronomy are very heavy on expounding upon the law. What does it mean to be ritually clean? Who can be a priest? What does it mean to keep the Sabbath holy? Lots of different things here. And this was done as a way to sort of hedge in the 10 Commandments, right? You don't want to break the 10 Commandments. So you write several documents that sort of expand on them and explain them so that you don't break the 10 Commandments, right? This is like me saying, okay, this particular thing is very fragile. So when you ship it somewhere, you want to put a lot of packing around it so that it doesn't break. Well, if you can use your imagination, the Torah sort of does that. The law that's there sort of packs around the 10 Commandments so that you don't break them. Because breaking the 10 Commandments is pretty bad, right? This is something that would require sacrifice. You'd have to make atonement with God. And you want to try to stay away from doing that because, this is the definition of sin in the Jewish faith. It's basically the safety and warranty information for Judaism. That's a fair assessment, right? Hashtag lawyered, right? It's so that you don't get lawyered, right? They're also really long books, so in scroll form, they're just plain heavy. Yes, that roll probably weighs 45, 50 pounds. The Torah is bubble wrap. In a really weird way of thinking about it, the Torah is kind of bubble wrap. Now, it's Judaic, according to the Judaic faith, it is holy and a divinely inspired bubble wrap, and it was given by God to Moses on purpose with specific wording and with intent, right? That makes bubble wrap kosher. I'm not trying to make definitive statements on what is and is not kosher. I'm just trying to give metaphors that might be useful. These metaphors might not hold up over the long run, but the idea, the functional idea is the same, and I think I'm still doing okay here. Tide is kosher. Like the Tide Pod? I don't think you should eat Tide Pods. No, I am not a rabbi. I am not Jewish. I'm not claiming to be Jewish. In any way. I'm not speaking with any sort of Judaic authority. I am not a Jewish leader. So let me just disclaimer all of that stuff, right? We're just talking about this historically, and I'm trying to explain how all of this stuff works together. Okay, so one of the things that it's important to remember here, and I say this at this point because I will end up needing to come back to it here in just a moment. There is a debate that's effectively goes like this. According to certain Jewish traditions, and there are disputing Jewish traditions here, but certain Jewish traditions claim that when God, Yahweh, spoke to Moses the law, this means that the law was originally transmitted orally, right? It was an oral law. And then Moses wrote it down, but it was not originally a written law. It was originally an oral law. And that is a very important caveat that we're going to come back to here in just a second, right? So, we have this Torah, and for several hundred years, the Jewish kingdom is going to exist in the Holy Land, or what they consider the Holy Land, which is roughly right around in here. This is something that starts probably, it really depends on whether or not we take the Jewish scripture as 100% unquestionable truth, or if we rely on archaeology as well as the textual examples. It is agreed by all that by around 800 BC/BCE, whatever you want to use, there is going to be a Jewish kingdom, and that it is being ruled by a Jewish aristocracy and a priesthood. And they have built a temple, and this temple is where sacrifice is done so that you and Yahweh can stay on working relationships. And if you do something wrong, you can go to the priest, and the priest will interpret the law and then describe what you need to do to basically get yourself right with the law. Because this was effectively a theocracy where the religious law was effectively the law of the land, and you had to follow it as well as any orders that the king gave. Right? So things are going pretty great for a few hundred years until the world got itself back together. So the establishment of the Jewish kingdom came in the gap that happened between the collapse of the Bronze Age and the beginning of the Iron Age. And this allowed a lot of smaller kingdoms to pop up because there weren't big centralized empires. But when those big centralized empires put themselves back together and started expanding, well, that's going to put the Jewish kingdom on the crosshairs, right? And if you've been around the stream since the very beginning, you've heard about a lot of this stuff. But there is a group of people called the Neo-Chaldeans, or other people refer to them as the Babylonians. And they ended up putting together this whole big kingdom right here, which is effectively all of Mesopotamia, modern-day Syria, all of what is today the Holy Land / Israel and Palestine, and then even down here into Arabia. And this includes the Jewish Holy Land. And the Jewish kingdom at that time was destroyed, and importantly, the temple was destroyed. Is that Florida? No, that's not Florida. That's the Middle East. It's roughly this region right around in here. Right here. So when the temple gets destroyed, there is a big functional issue here in Judaism. And that is you can't do sacrifices anymore. And according to the Jewish faith, the one way to get yourself right with God at that point was to go to the temple and do sacrifices. So what happens if you can't go do sacrifices anymore because there is no more temple? Well, that's where you start running into some cultural issues. It also does not help. And this, by the way, the destruction of the Jewish kingdom, the kingdom of Judah, happens in 586 by the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar II. What did the sacrifices include? Backs, welcome. And there were different sacrifices for different levels of transgression. So there were also different sacrifices for different economic sort of social structures. So if you were very wealthy, you would be expected to sacrifice a more valuable item. And many times this was through the form of animal sacrifice. So if you're a very, very wealthy individual, you might be expected to sacrifice a bull, which was a sign of status, right? And there were qualifications. The bull needed to be without blemish, which means that it's not like, a three-legged bull or one that couldn't produce offspring. You weren't going to give the runt of the litter to the temple. You were supposed to give a good, full quality thing. And this was part of the transgression redemption thing, right? But if you were maybe in somewhere in the middle, they didn't necessarily have what we would call a middle class, but the closest thing would be like a skilled labor class or maybe an artisan class. They might have to sacrifice something like a sheep or a goat, which was still a financial, sacrifice. Poor people or people that had labor, unskilled laboring jobs or had very, very low incomes might have to sacrifice a dove. Which is, just a small animal that's fairly plentiful. And if you didn't have these on hand, there were actually whole industries inside of the Jewish religion that sort of provided these for you. You could go to the temple and you could purchase an animal to be sacrificed if you did not have one. Because not everybody just walks around, carrying a backpack full of doves, unless you're a magician or a magician, you really probably don't have multiple doves just sitting around. So the sacrifices were ancient deflationary mechanisms. They actually really were. They really, really were. And there were other types of things that you could do if you wanted to make an offering instead of a sacrifice. You could do things like give food for the priesthood. You could purchase things for there were aromatic sacrifices. You could go to the temple and pour out some perfume, or you could do libation offerings, where if you were just trying to be nice, you could go and maybe give some wine. So there were lots of different ways, but there's a difference here between the sacrifice and the offering. So the offering is just like, hey, something really cool is happening, I'm going to go thank God. And the sacrifice is like, oh, I've done something wrong and I need to get back right. So it was matched by the level of transgression that you had made and your ability to financially afford this. They didn't want to break anybody financially or destroy anybody's wealth in order to get them, and sacrifice stuff. No taking the bite before sacrificing. No, you can't do that. They pass the sin to the animal. Then after they sacrifice the animal, your sins go to the grave with it. You'd think a three-legged cow would be better since it's being beef. So there's a functional mechanism here with the sacrifice where the blood of the animal is spilled in payment for the particular sin, but we're getting a little bit kind of off the rail here. We can debate the finer points of Hebraic sacrifice, perhaps maybe at the end if we have a little bit more time. As it is, I'm actually kind of slow at the moment, and I need to pick it up because I'm trying to get to where we're headed. And of course, there's also the whole thing. Now I'm getting right back on the tangent because I love tangents. There's also the whole Day of Atonement thing where the sin of the community was literally put on the scapegoat. That's where the term scapegoat even comes from. There we go. Lean beef. Chop off 3 more and it's ground beef. Would they define sin different back then than what it is now? That's what the law was for. So the Torah itself described what was right and what was wrong. So if you sinned back then, you were literally breaking the Jewish law. So you would go to the priest, and the priest, you say, I did this. The priest would look at the Torah and then maybe something else, which we'll talk about in just a second, decide whether or not you've done something wrong or how much you've done wrong, and then decide the sacrifice that is equivocable to your getting straight. Scapegoat versus tithe tangent. Tithing is adjacent to the law because it's in there, but specifically speaking, that is a whole other world. Tithing is something that was expected as a way for Jewish people to contribute to the upkeep of the community, especially the upkeep of the temple itself, to pay for the priesthood and all of the other things that went into the larger functioning part of the Jewish religion. The tithe is expected to be about 10%, and that was actually not the same as Jewish state taxes. So if you had a king that was particularly bad, they could actually collect state-level taxes, which were different than the tithe. So you'd be paying your 10% to the temple, and then you'd end up paying taxes to the king. Taxes for the temple is actually kind of the way that it ends up being construed, especially under later ruling groups that are not Jewish, that don't really understand the way that the Jewish world works, especially under things like the Romans and to a certain extent the Ptolemies. The Jews were allowed to collect what they called the temple tax, which was basically a tithe. So we have this situation. The temple has been destroyed. We've gone off into what we call the exile. And the Babylonians have taken most of the Jewish people, but not all, but most of the Jewish people over to this region over here in Mesopotamia, where they would stay for about 50 years. And during the process of living in a foreign country under observation, the Jewish faith is going to be forced to change quite a bit. Now, they don't change the fundamentals, but they change the practice. Because, again, they don't have a temple, and they have actually been forbidden to practice their religion. The Babylonians don't really care for this concept of monotheism, right? This idea of one God just doesn't sit very well with the Babylonians. So they were told, you cannot do this monotheistic stuff over here. You're going to make our gods very, very angry, and we're going to, have to face the wrath of our gods. So none of this, like your monotheism thing. You can't do that over here. With Hull's tangent about modern prosperity preaching, it's heresy even among the if you are properly translating and understanding the tenets of Christianity, prosperity gospel is a heretical movement. There's just a statement about that. That's not even really a tangent. A little off topic, but is the temple different than the synagogue? Yes. So a temple is actually where they would go do the sacrificing. There was only one of those, and it was designed by a specific blueprint that was given by God to the Jewish people, if you read their scriptures, with courtyards and sacrificing places and chambers. And there were certain levels where women could go in the outer courtyard and men could go to the inner courtyard, but only priests could go kind of in the inner courtyard, and then only the high priest could go into the most innermost chamber where the Ark of the Covenant was. And a synagogue was just a building where a teacher would talk about the Jewish faith. This would be very frequently associated with a school where young Jewish people would be taught how to read. Reading and literacy was very, very important to the Jewish people, even in the ancient world. They had one of the highest literacy rates in ancient history. So you go to school and you learn about this stuff that was very frequently associated with the synagogue. And the synagogue was where you would go to learn about the Torah itself, to hear some kind of sermon stuff, to celebrate certain things. And so there's a distinction there between the synagogues, which were many and numerous and all over the place, and the temple, which there was only one of in Jerusalem, right? Good question, though. It had nifty curtains. It did. Really thick curtains, right? So we're over in the exile. We've been told that we can't practice our religion, and we don't have a temple anymore. And this is going to bring rise to a new sort of function here. So we have the Torah scrolls, but those weren't really supposed to be sort of flashed around. They were not really cared for very much by the Babylonians. So what they came up with was this new kind of thing called the oral law. Now, there's some evidence that some of this was developing before the exile. I don't know how factual that is because we don't necessarily have a lot of sources that really describe Judaism at that point. Most of our sources that describe Judaism come from over 600 years in the future that talk about this period. So what we do know is that when they get over to exile, one of the ways that that some of the Jewish people, not all, but some of the Jewish people retain their practice is by having these people that had effectively memorized the Torah take on sort of a persona of a Jewish lawyer. So here's the kind of the conceit here, right? Basically, the law was the core of their religion, but the Babylonians didn't really understand that. So what the Jewish leadership in exile convinced the Babylonians to allow them to do was keep living under their law, right? We've been put in exile, but we're going to keep living under our law. And to do that, we need our legal experts to help guide us. And that is kind of the way that they were allowed to start bringing a little bit of the Torah back in, but there weren't many of those in exile, and the ones that were located and proved to be scriptural were effectively destroyed. So what happens is that without the law itself and without the temple, a lot of Jewish people felt like they needed even more, like a second layer of bubble wrap, if you will, another hedge. And that's what the oral law was, right? Enter Daniel. Yes, so if you are familiar with the characters of the Bible, this is during the books of Daniel. The exile, of course, is going to happen under lots of different people. If you read the book of Jeremiah, there's some stuff that is involved. If you read Nehemiah, you can read about some of the stuff that happens in the Babylonian captivity and the return, which we'll talk about here in just a second. So there's a lot of this in the Jewish scripture or the Christian Bible, whichever one you want to read. And there's even some of this in the Quran. Not as much, clearly, but there's some. Kyle says, I'm going to have to watch this later. You got too much work to get done. Oh, Kyle, well, thanks for just coming by. And I hope that work goes okay. Bit late to the party, but hey, man, Trey, what's up? Welcome. How's it going? Hope you're doing okay. All right, so we add, at this point, a second layer of bubble wrap, which is called the oral law, which is very legalistic, and it becomes... Oh, I've got a follow, yeah! Bum-ba-dum-bum, bum-ba-dum-bum-bum. Bax, thanks so much for that follow, and welcome to the adventure. It kind of scared me there for a second. I'm not used to hearing that very often. Not saying that everybody has to go click follow, but I'm just saying, like, most people tend to follow me when I'm not in the room. I get lots of followers at night or stuff like that. Or go raid somebody, get a lot of followers. Anyway, so these Jewish lawyers that had memorized the Torah are going to expound upon that with additional oral statements. Like, well, the book of Leviticus says this, but you really shouldn't even do this either, because like if you do this thing, you're really breaking this thing, and if you're breaking this thing, you're even closer to breaking like one of the commandments. So like you just need to stay away from all of this. So it's an even further protection of hedge around even the Torah. So you have the 10 Commandments, then you have the Torah, and then you have the oral law, right? And then they get to go back home. Under the original leader of the Achaemenid Persian Empire, Cyrus the Great, the Jewish people are allowed to return back home. And we enter what is referred to as the Second Temple period. Then finally you get to the IKEA assembly manual that shows you how to literally construct a box to put around the oral law, to put around the Torah, to put around the Ten Commandments, right? And it's called something like like I don't know. I was trying to come up with some Swedish pun. I don't know, like Lormengander. I don't know. That's a horrible pun, but Normangander encircles, of course, the world, and Lormengander would go around the. I'll shut up now. Anyway, they get to go back home. We enter what's called the Second Temple period. And this is really and seriously, and I'm not trying to be silly here, the Second Temple period is the most successful that the Jewish religion and state has ever been and had ever been in the past. They are able to establish Jerusalem once again. Oh no, you're welcome to throw those out there, and you can even explain them, and I'll love the puns in Swedish too. And they rebuild the temple, right? And this is sort of what the final version looks like. Now, again, it's only a model, right? So this is a model of the Second Temple based on descriptions that are in multiple historical documents and based on the limited archaeological remains that still exist. So you'd have this sort of big outer courtyard, and you'd have the inner courtyard, and there'd be some sacrificey things done here, and the priesthood could only come back here. And this is like the inner sanctum, where only the high priest could go on one day of the year, the Day of Atonement. That's the scapegoat day, by the way. So anyway, this is what it would probably have looked like in downtown Jerusalem. Today, this location is, of course, called the Temple Mount, and there is a mosque on top of this. It's called the Dome of the Rock, which was built by the early Umayyad dynasty. But that's still a bone of contention if you know anything about the Temple Mount itself and the Wailing Wall. And if you've been around for some of our earlier discussions about the history of Israel as a state, we've talked about some of that stuff. So the Second Temple period is a big deal, but it itself brings its own form of problem. The Dome of the Rock, this is the Al-Aqsa Mosque? Yeah, correct. This is correct. And I'll probably will never be able to see that, or the inside of it. You can go to the temple, or the outside, like the courtyard part of it today. But as of just a few years ago, they're actually not letting anybody that isn't Muslim inside to take pictures. And I understand that. It's a religious site. They don't want necessarily a whole bunch of people just like gawking and stuff. I can completely understand that. Luckily, they did allow Google Earth to go in. So if you go over to the Dome of the Rock itself and the Al-Aqsa Mosque, you can kind of drop yourself into Google Street View and look around on the inside. And I'm very glad that they did that. Finally got to know that I passed the essay I mentioned. Nice. Congratulations. Waiting for Friday to get the next assignment and presentation to do. Sounds good. I mean, the busy, but there's different levels of busy, right? There's like good busy, and then there's like I'm breaking even busy, and then there's just like ugh, right? And I hope you're not to ugh. So anyway, Second Temple, we're back. We built the temple again. It's all good, or is it? Because here's the thing: when you are the Jewish faith and you reestablish your temple, now you've got situations. One of those situations is you have a lot of people that became very, very important during the exile as being proficient in this new oral law. But now that you had a reestablished priesthood and the temple itself, a lot of people said, we don't need the oral law anymore because we can go back to just doing the Torah and sacrifice. And this is actually going to cause a significant rift inside of the Jewish state at the time, and this is where they're going to start sectarian opposition to each other. And there's going to be a group called the Sadducees, who are effectively going to be the people that run the temple. And then there are going to be the Pharisees, who are the people that are the memorizers of the law and the promoters of the oral law. And if you'll remember earlier in the stream, I said that there is a particular interpretation that says that even the original law that came from God to Moses was orally given. Well, this comes back again here because the Pharisees are going to claim, well, the law was always oral. You shouldn't have written it down necessarily anyway. It was oral in the first place, and you can have your written law, which is, it's one thing, but the oral law is the way to go. And this actually does get rather heated inside of the Jewish faith, and it causes quite a bit of disruption in the Jewish state, which was called the Hasmonean dynasty for a couple hundred years. And it's going to cause assassination attempts, and it's going to bring a whole bunch of people to really, really unfortunate ends. People are going to bite their uncle's ear off. It gets really weird. And if you've been around again and you've heard us talk about the Hasmonean dynasty, you'll know a little bit about what I'm talking about. Now, this big argument between written law with the temple, oral law as a sort of second hedge, is going to ultimately be ended by the Romans. And specifically, when Rome is going to go in during the first Jewish revolt and destroy the second temple. And I get to put on the adventure hat because I get to show a statue that I have seen. So if you have not been to the room before or have not been here a while, this is the adventure hat. When I go do adventures in the real world, I wear this because I'm pasty and I burn really easily. Also, it looks kind of dashing. I mean, I also kind of look like a Gomer, but, it is what it is. But when I get to a point on stream where I share something that I have seen or talk about a place that I have been and show photos of that, I get to wear the adventure hat. So, we are sharing the adventure hat. There we go. You gotta love them. And this guy. So this is a statue of the Emperor Titus. And this is in the Vatican museums. So if you've ever been to the Vatican Museum, you might have seen this statue. The Emperor Titus is going to be in charge of a Roman army. He's not actually emperor yet. His dad's emperor. His dad was the guy, the Emperor Vespasian. When Vespasian becomes emperor, he leaves his son Titus to finish up the conquering of the Judean area and the destruction of the Herodian state. And this guy is going to break into Jerusalem and destroy the Second Temple. You have been to the Vatican museums. Did you see that statue? You might have. You might be able to wear your own adventure hat. Do I also own adventure sunscreen? Yes, I do own lots of adventure sunscreen that is very high SPF, and I wear lots of it. But you can't really do a good job of putting sunscreen in your hair. There were a lot of statues. There are a lot of statues in the Vatican museums. It is absolutely full. This particular one is in a niche in a larger gallery. So if you weren't really paying attention, you might have missed it. And that's okay because I'll show you my picture. So much artwork on the ceilings. Oh yeah, you could spend 3 days in the Vatican museums and still not really feel like you really gave everything the attention that it deserves. One of the cooler museums that I've ever been in. And I don't think I'd ever want to go back unless I was going with somebody that had not been there and needed help, or if I was bringing students. My neck hurts. It's kind of a my neck hurts museum because there's art above you, there's art on the walls, there are statues everywhere. There are big display cases full of things that have been given to the Pope as gifts. There's all sorts of weird and cool stuff in the Vatican museums. Got to head off again, but got up early. All right, Metran, take it easy. Have a good one. Good luck on your adventure, my friend. So, with the temple destroyed, things are not going to be going so great for the Jewish people. To put on top of that, the Romans decide that the Jewish people don't necessarily need to live concentrated anymore in this one area, and the Roman forces began to forcibly deport the Jewish people to various parts of the Roman world, and they really do get scattered all over. There are communities that pop up over here in Mesopotamia, all throughout the Roman world, all the way over here into even Spain, northern Africa, all the way up the Nile River, because remember, the Nile flows from south to north. And Jewish people even cross over here into the Persian Empire, and you start seeing Jewish people move through Central Asia. The diaspora is going to scatter Jewish people across the habitated world at that time. And with the destruction of the temple, the oral law is once again going to become a very important part of the Jewish life. Because while they had the temple, there could be a legitimate argument made of, we don't really need the oral law because we can just go sacrifice and we can be okay. But now that there's not a temple, well, this is the crux of the issue. And by the time you get to the first century, so the destruction of the temple happens in 70 AD or CE. Sorry I mentioned it. Why was this done? The Romans didn't like the idea of a monotheistic state being part of their periphery, and the Jewish people rebelled against the institution of Roman polytheistic beliefs in their area. Specifically, there were a whole bunch of Roman battle standards that were being paraded around, which all had very big pagan markings, and the emperor at the time was a guy named Nero, who decided that he wanted a statue of himself placed in the inner sanctum of the Jewish temple, which of course was like the biggest of no-nos. They got pissy with Rome, and Rome decided to just destroy them, which is what ended up happening. It did take 6 years, but they ended up destroying them. The first Jewish revolt is from 67 to 73. And it's really over in 70, but there's this place called Masada, where the last little bit of the Jewish rebels went out, and then there was a 3-year-long siege where the Romans slowly starved them to death, which is kind of a bad way to go, but it's what happened, right? So the Second Temple period is done for. And when the Second Temple period is done, this causes the Jewish people to have a really sort of like heart-to-heart moment. Like, how are we going to practice our religion? Because we no longer have the temple. And because we are now so spread out, there's not even any real hope that we could ever consolidate again in the first place. And there's no real hope that even if we were able to consolidate again, the Romans would allow us to rebuild the temple. And the Jewish people believe that the only legitimate place to have the temple is where they say God told them to build the temple, which is on the Temple Mount, right? So they can't just build one wherever they want to and go at it. That just wouldn't work the right way. So they have this sort of like moment where they just have to realize that the only thing that they really have is probably the oral law. And this is going to be a shift to what we refer to as rabbinical Judaism. So we're not going to do sacrifice anymore. We're going to follow the teachings of rabbis. How accurate is the movie Masada? I do not know because I have not seen it. That's one of those movies that I sort of looked at and I was like, I don't know. And so I avoided it. If you've seen it, is it a good movie? If it's a good movie, I'll give it a watch, and I might be able to make it through. Maybe. But I don't know. It's a good movie. Okay. I'll have to put that one on the list. I don't know when I'll get around to it, but when I do get around to it, I will report on the Discord. For those of you that do not know or are interested, we do have a Discord. We hang out, we talk. We share lots of memes. I share stuff that's happening in history, sometimes current events that relate to things that are in history. We, shoot the breeze, have a good time. It's got Peter. That's not necessarily a guarantee that it's going to be a good movie, though. Not a guarantee. Okay, so we've got this new focus on rabbinical teaching. Here's the deal, though. We're going to now need to establish schools to make certain that the rabbis that are going to lead our communities from synagogues are going to be properly trained in how to do this. They're going to need to know the Ten Commandments, they're going to need to know the Torah, and they're going to need to know the oral law. I like a lot of stuff. I take umbrage to that. I like a lot of stuff. There's a ton of stuff that I like. I just don't... I'm very vocal about the stuff that I don't like, and sometimes that seems overwhelming. I'm more vocal when I don't like something than I am when I do like something. But I'll have you go back through the mod chat, and over the last, I don't know, let's say 4 weeks, I bet that I have talked good about more movies than I've talked bad about movies. And you can't count Star Wars movies because we all poop on Star Wars movies. I just recently gave an unequivocal support for Ghostbusters Afterlife. I loved that movie. It was really good. It had some issues. It was pacing. The pacing was a little off sometimes because it got a little too fast. It tried to cram too much in. But I really like Ghostbusters Afterlife. It was really good. Before that, we watched Free Guy, which I also found delightful. I can't remember what else we've watched recently. As a history man, a lot of movies must bug me. Yeah, Joe, it does. Sometimes I can put it aside and just enjoy myself, like the movie Knight's Tale. The movie Knight's Tale is so historically bad. Like, it's just so bad. But it's almost so bad that it's not even worth picking at, you know? So, I really enjoy Knight's Tale. It's funny. It's funny. Right? I was just about to say that this all sounds very Star Wars. 2 temples destroyed, infighting about how to properly continue traditions. Well, you know, if the shoe fits. He did say you don't like much. I like a lot of stuff. Joe, I meant to ask you this yesterday in Daria's stream, and I know this is completely off topic in one side or another. But when I mentioned Port Aransas, it sounded like you had actually been there. Have you been there to see whooping cranes? And if so, were you successful to see whooping cranes? Speaking as a former archaeologist and now a military member, I largely just accept movies as fiction. Yeah, I'm getting better at that. I went through a period of time where it just was not fun at all. But I'm getting better about that. And dealing with that in less strict ways. I'm getting soft in my old age, perhaps. I still do enjoy a good quibble every now and then, though. Anyway, rabbinical Judaism. We're going to build schools. And we're going to start teaching our rabbis so that we know that these rabbis are going to be able to be equipped to answer the questions that are going to come up in our situations, right? Never trust anything that says based on a true story. Quite true. So what this is going to do is going to start popping up some Jewish schools, especially here in this region, which is the region, well, let me stop the map. This region right around in here, which is called Galilee. And there's a city right about here, which is called Caesarea. And it was a pretty big city. It was one of the largest man-made ports on Earth at the time, had a very high population, and it was not completely destroyed by the Romans, right? So, you know, good place to go if you're a Jewish person. And there's a big city school that gets started up there, and it becomes one of the more important centers of Jewish learning. And what this is going to do is give a basis for the creation of a new work of literature called the Mishnah. Now, the Mishnah is the work of a guy. I don't think I'm going to be able to get this on one line, am I? Is the work of a guy named Judah Hanasi. So Judah Hanasi was one of these rabbinical teachers, and he decided that one of the things that needed to happen to encourage proper teaching was to take the compilation of the oral law and actually write it down. Because now that the oral law has become kind of the central focus of the way that we're going to operate, if everybody that knows the oral law happened to die, which, the Romans just killed thousands and thousands of Jews, so this is not necessarily out of the question, we need to be able to transmit this knowledge to the next generation. So Judah Hanasi actually works to edit and codify and write down the oral law. And that codification is called the Mishnah. You camped at Goose Island, and you went to Aransas. You were not there when the cranes came, but you saw a lot of vultures and some javelinas, and you got closer to alligators than you should have. I think within visual eyeball distance of an alligator is probably too close for my comfort. I would prefer to look at them with binoculars from a distance, right? These are kind of the the sacred Jedi texts that get burned down in, episode 8. So Judah Hanasi is a very important figure, and he was and still is remembered. And if you want to, you can go here, and this is the tomb of Judah Hanasi. And, he's not still in there, but this is where he was buried. This, by the way, is taking... Judah Hanasi lives from the year 135 to the year 217. So when he writes the Mishnah down, this is probably closer to the end of his life, probably in the very early 200s. And this is the first big work of rabbinical Judaism, and this is very widely accepted throughout the Jewish world, right? So copies of this start circulating through the diaspora, and all of the different centers of Jewish learning end up getting a copy of the Mishnah, and they're like, oh, this is good, right? There's not really a lot of debate about whether or not the Mishnah is legitimate. And I mention that specifically because we're getting to the point where there is going to be some argumentation. It's also important here to note that the Mishnah was originally written in Hebrew with a little bit of Aramaic. This would have been traditional old-fashioned Hebrew, not the later Babylonian Hebrew that we're going to talk about in just a second. So, we now have a codified version of the oral law. This is called the Mishnah. But even the Mishnah can be, and very much was, debated. You came here for an argument. What's up, David? Vipers is going to give it to you right off the bat. No, you didn't. Do I have a picture? Ah, yes. Okay. And by the way, I have this. This is a photograph of the oldest Mishnah document that we have. This is from, it's called the Kaufman manuscript, and it's owned by, I don't know, it might have donated it to a museum by now, but originally it was in the hands of a German textual collector. So there we go. This is, your good old-fashioned Hebrew here. And this is the modern version the more modern version called Pointed Hebrew. You can see all these little dots which indicate vowels. You missed the argument about what percentage of media Shane likes versus what he doesn't. I don't experience all of media, right? I don't watch literally everything. Well, not anymore. I used to watch basically everything that came out in the theaters, but I used to go to see movies like 5 out of 7 days a week. So I don't experience all TV. Anyway, so this brings us to the Talmud. Because, so back when I was in like the end of my second and third and the beginning of my fourth year in college, I would go see everything. Like everything that came out. everything. All of the horrible comedies, all of the romantic flicks, all of the really low budget horror movies. I would go see all of them. When I was in college, we had 2 theaters in our city that would show all of the new stuff. They would very frequently have showings of older films. And we had another cinema that specifically showed kind of art housey films and stuff that they had brought over from other places like Europe or Asia. So, you know, you tried Movie Pass, 1 movie per day, and you ran out of movies. We should make a history of cinema viewer requests so Shane has to watch everything. So Shmonite, without going too deep into personal family history, I ended up with a whole bunch of jobs, and by the time I got to the point where I didn't need all of those jobs, I ended up keeping all of those jobs, and there were some financial issues. My dad lost his job, and there was all sorts of stuff with, like, you know, helping families out, so I had to go get more jobs. At one point I had 4 jobs my freshman year in college. Anyway, I just kept working a lot because I'd gotten used to it, and I was making a lot of money. And here's the crazy thing about it. I worked at a coffee shop, and it turns out that people that work at movie theaters also like coffee, and people that work at coffee places like movies. And there was like a black market exchange where if anybody that worked at a movie theater saw me working at the coffee shop and wanted something, we had worked out a medium whereby they might get something at a significant discount. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Not ethical in the least. I was a younger person and had fewer ethics. So there we go. I did not pay for the vast majority of those. Just saying. Anyway, Le Choc. I know. I've always been weirdly economic about being able to find things. Coffee for tickets, got it. You could say so. You could say so. Or just even turning the other way as I kind of walked in. Yeah. Anyway, there's a reason why people would want to hang around me when it comes to a post-apocalyptic wasteland. And one of those is I have a knack for figuring out what people want and how to get it to them. So there we go. Now, what's up with this Talmud thing? Okay, so here's the deal. The Mishnah gets circulated. Everybody gets their hands on the Mishnah. Rabbinical schools start popping up all over the diaspora. But the location in Galilee is going to be sort of the first big one, the city of Caesarea, and also another city called Tiberias. But there is another one that pops up over here in Mesopotamia, specifically right around here. And there's kind of this Babylonian school of Judaism that gets developed. And to a certain extent, the Babylonian school and what becomes known as the Jerusalem school don't necessarily 100% agree on the interpretation of the oral law. So you're like, wait a second. But you said that the oral law was interpretation of the Torah, and the Torah was interpretation of the Ten Commandments. So if the Torah is one layer of bubble wrap on the Ten Commandments, and the oral law, which is now codified as the Mishnah, is a second layer of bubble wrap, Shane, are you telling me that there's another layer of bubble wrap? Yes, there is another layer of bubble wrap, because there is interpretation on what the oral law means. And you're like, how much more interpretation do you need? And the answer is unlimited amounts of interpretation. And the interpretation of the Mishnah becomes known as the Gemara. Now, here's the thing. the first Gemara that gets put together comes from the Jerusalem school. And this is going to happen somewhere between maybe the year 250 to around the year 400. And this interpretation and this debate, it's kind of like commentary. So if you've ever read a legal brief where someone states the law and then you have a whole bunch of opinions from lawyers about what that law means, that's really what the Gemara is. It's a law commentary. And it gets really, really esoteric and really, really bizarrely specific, right? And the Jerusalem Gemara that gets written starts sort of being circulated, and it turns out that not everybody digs it. There's some debate about whether or not the Jerusalem Gemara is really that legitimate, because at this point, again, we have competing opinions. They fought the law and the law won. Indeed. Is this where they start getting real nitpicky about stuff like food, like what counts as grains and soups and stuff? To a certain extent, that stuff is in the Mishnah, but there is some of that stuff in the Gemara as well. But here's what happens. The Jerusalem school takes the Mishnah, which everybody agrees on, and adds their version of their interpretation, the Gemara, and what they put together when you get so it's kind of like a combination thing here. When you get a Mishnah and you add a Gemara, you get a Talmud. So if you go find a Talmud, there is going to be the Mishnah, which there is only one of, and there is going to be either the Jerusalem Gemara or the Babylonian Gemara. But here's the thing. For a while, the Jerusalem Gemara is the Gemara. And it gets circulated a little bit, and it kind of gets some use, and people are kind of getting on board with it. It's written in what's called Western Aramaic, and it does see some use for quite some time. The oldest version of it that still exists is this one. This is called the Leiden manuscript, and this is the oldest Jerusalem version of the Gemara that we have, and it's from the 1300s. And usually what you'll have is something like this, which is like, here is a statement from the Mishnah on one page, and then you'll have a whole bunch of discussion about what it says. And if you look at these, the statements are almost always... Oh, well, you don't need to... That's not what I was after. Sorry. Wrong button. Nope, wrong button too. There we go. If you look at this stuff, the discussions are almost always referring to things like what this rabbi says. I'm sorry, I'm catching up. About 90% of it is whether or not the Balrogs have wings. Oh. You're tempting me to get involved in this debate. And I am not going to get involved in this debate here. This is not the forum for this debate. We should most likely wait for a History of Middle-earth stream. I do owe everybody a History of Middle-earth stream, by the way. So one of those will be coming fairly soon. But this is not the moment for the Balrog discussion. I do have opinions. They might be considered by some to be hot takes, but... yeah, I have opinions. Anyway, it gets pretty detailed, and it'll say stuff like, here's the law, here's what the Mishnah says. And Rabbi so-and-so says this. And Rabbi so-and-so says, no, this. And then it'll come back, but Rabbi so-and-so also says this thing. But then Rabbi so-and-so says that thing. And it can get kind of in the weeds, is the way that we usually refer to it in the group chat, like or the mod chat. We're just getting in the weeds. We're over our heads here. Get on with it. Gamara sounds like an overpriced car. Lol. 10% is explaining the Eagles were nobody's. Yeah, there we go. Today is not that day. Dengue gave Shane Vietnam flashbacks. So that's a strong yes to the wings. No. Sounds like next door. It kind of is in the we're comparing what so-and-so said to somebody else. But anyway, the Jerusalem Gemara gets circulated around. We have a version of it that goes all the way back to about the 1300s. It's the oldest version that we have. It's called the Leyden manuscript, but it's been around, and there are still copies of it today. However, it is not the popular Gemara. In fact, a lot of people consider it far too rustic. And what do I mean by that? Well, the region of Galilee was a lot more rural than the region of Babylon. And a lot of the discussion that is in the the Jerusalem version of the Gemara talks about a lot of stuff that's like farming related, and it has a lot to do with whether or not I can do this farming related thing, or whether or not this rural thing happens that way. And it just didn't feel very universally acceptable in a lot of people's lives.
I'm Spartacus!
No, I'm Spartacus.
I'm Spartacus! I'm Spartacus!
I'm Spartacus.
Spartacus!
767. Thank you so much for that subscription. And welcome back to being Spartacus. Let me catch up. Sounds like the app? Yeah, okay. Seinfeld voice. What's the deal with numerology? Moose says, could the Balrog wings in the movie just be Frodo being an unreliable narrator? Perhaps. But he's not actually the narrator of The Lord of the Rings. It was almost certainly the version that he wrote down. Anyway, we'll that's another whole... Nope, not going to get on that one. There must be more than this provincial life. Indeed. So what's the other version? Well, there is also the Babylonian Gemara. The Babylonian Gemara is from a different group of scholars. Judah Hanasi had a whole bunch of really good students, and some of them had actually gone over to Mesopotamia to start this particular school. It is composed, the Babylonian Gemara is composed a little bit later. The late 200s is when they start working on that. And then that goes into the middle or late 400s. Some people say it was finalized about 450. And this is going to come from specifically the Sura Academy, which is it's actually just south of where modern-day Baghdad is, and another big city in Mesopotamia called Nisibis, which has a very high Jewish population. This was written in Babylonian Aramaic, and this is the Babylonian Hebrew that Mac in the lab coat mentioned earlier that he was not particularly fond of. They changed the way that some of the letters are shaped. They changed the way that they formulate some of the stuff, whether or not it's below a line, a midline, or above a midline thing, that kind of stuff. And it looks different. Anyway, whether or not it's messed up is to debate. So, the Babylonian Gemara plus the Mishnah is what most people think of when we say the Talmud. So if you find a Jewish scholar and you refer to the Talmud and they go, oh yeah, let's read the Talmud, they are almost certainly going to be referring to the Mishnah plus the Babylonian Gemara. Almost got me. Hey, what's up, Schneagle? Good to see you. Good self-control there. Yes, just lock that down. No. Yes, Lord of the Rings and Tolkien universe stuff is absolutely my squirrel moment. You're for throwing all the way back to Proto-Hebrew. You just don't even like the points. You just want to guess what the vowels are there, Mac. Because, who needs vowels, right? So the oldest version of the Babylonian Gemara is this guy. This is what we refer to as the Munich Babylonian Talmud. It's from a collection of documents that's held in Munich. And this one dates to 1342. 1342 is the oldest version of the Babylonian Talmud that we have. So would the Babylonian version be a more modern interpretation? It's more of an urban interpretation. The cities that they were around were much more urban and cosmopolitan. And that applied to a lot more of the people that were in the Jewish world at the time because, and I neglected to mention this, but it was an important point that I forgot. So thank you for asking that question. It's brought me back around. When the diaspora happened, when all of the Jewish people were scattered out across the Roman Empire, what happened is that they very frequently congregated in cities. Very few of them ended up going out into the countryside, finding land, setting themselves up in these really big villas. Most of the Jewish people were going to find small communities of Jewish people in other cities. And they would form communities inside of these cities that would take on various jobs around the city itself, but the Babylonian version of the Gemara tended to line up more with the lifestyle that most Jewish people were experiencing during that period of time. So it wasn't necessarily that the Jerusalem Gemara was just horrible. It just didn't line up as much with the way that they were living at the time, right? So imagine today that there was a lifestyle manual from before there was electricity, and there was another manual that was written after electricity, right? That's going to be really, really different. And we would associate ourselves today more with the one that had electricity. It's the same sort of thing, right? It's just a different lifestyle. Having worked extensively with Hebrew, I do. I need vowels. I understand. Saving roll against obsession. I must have had advantage on that one because I get really easily distracted by the weird little tangents. I get thrown off pretty easily by stuff. And I kind of do like getting thrown off by stuff because if you all are interested in it, I like giving you all information that plays into the larger idea. Right? So if we say the Talmud today, we're almost certainly talking about the Mishnah plus the Babylonian Gemara. And if you're interested, I actually have a passage chosen that I want to read for you all that kind of explains what we're talking about here. All right. So there's a Jewish scripture here, and let me see if I can share this particular image. All right. I think we can, well, yeah, let's do that. Here, I'll show you how nerdy I am. This is what my Firefox banner looks like. And if you know what that is, you'll know that I'm a giant nerd. So, we have here a passage from the Mishnah, right? And here's our interpretation. And Rabbah says, another similar halakha, if one fell from a roof due to an atypical wind such that it could not have been anticipated in advance that he would fall, and while falling he caused damage and humiliated an injured party, he is liable for the damage but exempt from paying the 4 types of indemnity as he did not intend to fall. If he fell due to a typical wind and caused damage and humiliated the injured party while falling, he is liable to pay the 4 types of indemnities as his fall was caused by negligence. But he is nevertheless exempt from paying compensation for humiliation as he did not intend to fall. But if he tumbled while falling, so he could fall on this person in order to protect himself from the impact with the ground, he is liable to pay compensation for the humiliation as well, because although he did not intend to cause shame, he did intend to land on the person. So here's the scenario. A guy is on a roof, and a wind blows, and knocks him off of the roof, and that person falls onto a second person, and that person is injured and suffers humiliation. There are three outcomes to this. Number one, if the wind was unexpected, right, it was just a sudden gust of wind, and it knocked the person off, the person, when they fell, does have to pay for that person's medical bills, but he doesn't have to pay for humiliating him. Because, just to be honest, he didn't really mean to do that, right? Now, if the wind was predicted, like if he was up there on a day where they had predicted really high wind, or if he was in an area where everybody knew it's real windy up there, and he got blown off by a sudden gust of wind, then it is his fault. Except for the humiliation, because he should have been wise enough to not go up there in the first place, so he does have to pay for that. But he didn't intend to fall on that guy. But if he was up there being a dum-dum, and as he was falling, he saw Jimmy, and he purposefully landed on Jimmy, then he does have to pay for the humiliation. Because he didn't intend to fall, but he did kind of intend to use Jimmy as a cushion. What we really want to know is if the Talmud is responsible for the top 40 Yiddish words. Yiddish at the time had not been invented when the Talmud was being put together. Your brain hurts. But this is what the Talmud is. It has a law, and then it talks about how these things work out in practice. Frankly, I want to know why so many people are on roofs and why these roofs are so unstable. It's the wind, Angel. Also, hey, Angel, I don't think I said hello as you came in. Hey, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. Also, hey, Techman, I don't think I said hello to you as well. Yeah, and there's all sorts of really, really interesting passages in the Talmud. Stuff like what happens if you fall off of a roof and onto the horns of a bull. There's all sorts of stuff where it's like I put some dirt on this cloth, and that cloth just happened to be on top of something that somebody else owned, and the cloth that I put it on was supposed to hold the dirt, but there was a hole in it. So even though I meant for the cloth to hold the dirt, some of the dirt went through the hole and onto the other person's belonging. Do I have to replace that belonging? And it's like, well, you did put it on there, but you didn't intend for it to happen. So you probably do need to pay some restitution, but you probably don't have to pay for the whole thing because it wasn't really your fault, right? That kind of stuff is all through the Talmud. That's where they built their... Oh, that's horrible. What if his wife told him not to be stupid and stay off the roof? See, now, there's actually a lot of interpretation as to whether or not good advice plays into stuff like this. And I'm not joking. Like, if you received good advice, especially from a rabbi, not to do something and you did it anyway, you're on the hook for that junk. Does it tell me what to do with a drunken sailor? It talks a lot about alcohol. One of the things, you're not supposed to touch the alcohol distillation stuff without washing your hands. Because if you don't wash your hands, you might ruin the beer. And this is actually good science, because we understand that there's a lot of bacteria in our dirt and in our dirty fingernails. And if we go messing around with the beer and we get contaminated bacteria in the beer, it might kill the beer yeast, right? So save the beer, wash your hands. Sounds ironic. Thou shalt not drink White Claw. It's like rain on your wedding day, right? So is a rabbinical school more a religious school or more a law school? See, Joe, that's the crazy... it's not the crazy. I shouldn't have said crazy. That's the interesting thing about it. A lot of them would not distinguish the two. A lot of really strict Jewish people, especially people that are of a group of people called Hasidic... the Hasidic Jewish people don't really make very much of a distinction between law and religion. These are the very, very strict Jewish people. I have I have a photo of some people in Hasidic dress. Note, I did not say that I had a picture of some Hasidic Jews, but if you know where this particular photo comes from, you maybe get a little bit of a giggle. But there you go. If you see the people with like the long beards and the little like hair on the side of their head, those are Hasidic Jewish people. Do you like dogs? Love that movie, by the way. The Pentecostals of Judaism. Oh, that's a hot take. I don't know about that, Mac in a lab coat. I might say that the Kabbalah is kind of like the I don't know. I don't know, man. I don't know. That's entirely complimentary. Okay. I didn't take it that way, but okay. I guess that explains the difference between your opinions and my opinions, but such is life. Anyway, the Hasidic people today are still using the Talmud. Now, here's the thing. A lot of people have kind of moved away from the Talmud. The Talmud's importance in modern day Judaism is not as powerful as it used to be. A lot of people today use the term secular Judaism to mean people that are Jewish by heritage and perhaps practice some but don't follow all the laws. But the Talmud is still being used in rabbinical studies across the world, and it's mostly, again, the Babylonian Gemara version. But the Hasidic Jewish people don't really do a lot of distinction between religious law and the religion itself, because to them, this is still coming from God, right? The ultimate core of the entire Jewish law is the Ten Commandments that God spoke to Moses. So the Talmud is just a further level distinction and discussion on the principles that were established by God. So to them, the legal system within Judaism is the religion itself, right? Now, we're not trying to say that there are people that think that they should only follow Jewish law and that stuff like secular law, like the law of the United States or the law of Canada or something like that, should not apply to Jewish people. Though I'm sure that there are some people that are incredibly Jewish that do believe that, but I would say that's a very small percentage. There aren't enough pages in existence to explain the differences in how you two see the world. You all, I wish that we could present a somewhat ambiguated version of our discussions. I don't know how many of you all know this. If you've hung around the stream, you probably have. But the mods in my chat are probably, other than my blood relatives, the three people that I love the most on the face of the earth. My wife and my two best friends, Mac in a lab coat and KP. And I love these people with the strongest love that I can muster. But we do not agree on everything. And some of the times that we get into arguments, we are arguing over the distance between, like a hair's breadth. And there are times, especially where Mac and I will get into a debate and we'll get an hour into this and then we'll figure out that we actually agree. And it's like, why do we even have this entire argument? Like, what are you ultimately trying to say? Like this, well, that's what I'm trying to say. It's funny and frustrating, and I love it all at the same time. You've done that before with friends, right? Shane always agrees with me, or else he should. I do not always agree with my wife. I agree on most important things with my wife, but there are things that I do not agree on. I still haven't figured out exactly when we need to clean the tub. Like by the time I figured out that it needs to be cleaned, it's probably like weeks past of it actually needing to be cleaned. But like to me, I'm just like, I mean, it's a tub. I'm going to get in there and like I'm going to be fine. Like, oh my gosh, the tub is disgusting. It's true, all of it. I'm just in the corner, disappointedly shaking my head the entire time. I mean, you've gotten into some debates as well, but it's not as common. If you had to roll a piece of die or roll a dice and guess which two of the three of us were going to be in really nitpicky debates, it's most likely going to be me and Mac. But we all sort of have our little corners that we kind of retreat to if we need to. All right, so that is the Talmud. And it's an interesting document. And again, if you want to, you can go find it completely for free on the internet and go, read some more interesting stuff. There's a whole bunch of really just completely weird esoteric stuff in there that you might not think would show up in a document that it does. Stuff like how far you should stand away from a wall if you're going to urinate on it, or how much you should pay somebody if one of your animals accidentally kills a child. It goes all over the spectrum. Any debate that has ever come up in the Jewish world might have a reference directly in the Talmud. You never know what it's going to be. It's sort of like potpourri. You never really know what you're going to end up getting, right? It must be a pain arguing with Shane. Well, tubs were invented in 3500 BC. I will admit that sometimes when I make a statement that I know I believe in, and I don't want to necessarily go through the process of digging up all of the stuff to explain why I believe it, I sometimes might just fall back on sounding really important. And I could do that pretty well. If I have an opinion, I'm almost always going to have reasoning behind it and logic behind it. Sometimes I just don't feel like digging up the citation. Like, okay, it says this in this book. I don't know what page it says this book. Shane is Hermione Granger. Okay, so Hermione should have been Ravenclaw. Let's just be honest. She should have been Ravenclaw. The bravery aside, she should have been Ravenclaw. So I'll take that as a compliment. She was incredibly brilliant. Arguing is just two people who are built to fill different holes in society, learning how to see each other. Mac, that is brilliant. I don't know if you came up with that on the spur, but that's brilliant. Did I miss the part where the rabbi tore the scroll from the mouth of a golem? No, we haven't talked about that. It does take your choice into account, right? It's Leviosa, not Leviosa. All right, everybody. Anybody have any questions? So I'm officially wrapped up with the Talmud, and I hope that was everything that everybody wanted it to be, and that it answered all of your outstanding questions. Now, I know we had some stuff that popped up earlier in the chat. If we need to circle back to anything, you're welcome to bring up some topics, or if you have any questions that have come up over the course that you didn't necessarily want to tangent me off with, now is a good time. Or if you have any of those lovely adventure points that you'd like to spend, you may now feel free to do so. But at the moment, what I am doing, I am heading towards a poll in just a second where we are going to pick the next viewer request stream. But, as always, if there are any questions, let me know. How long is the request queue, and when will that open up? So, Sci-Fi, Sci-Fi, did I refund you those points, or did you actually pay for it and then not get it? I really can't remember, and I'll completely trust whatever you tell me. You honestly don't know. I don't know either. So I'll just give you. I know that I goofed up on that one. I'll own it. So that's what it is. Okay, so the queue itself is supposed to be around here. Oh no. All right. There were 4 names on the queue, and it went Metrand, David, Batbird, Sci-Fi. But we did Batbirds because that was Talmud. Sci-Fi was supposed to be before that, and I goofed it up. So that is already planned. That will be the next one that we choose. So technically right now there are 2 people on the list ahead of anybody. But we don't do point redemption viewer requests in a row. We do point request, then viewer choice, then point request, then viewer choice. So right now, what we need to do is vote, and then the next one will be sci-fis. And then on that one, we will, if we have anybody, put somebody else in the specific queue. I actually do have a calendar, and I've got it all straightened out because I got on a weird run the other day, and I've actually already prepped everything for Sci-Fi's viewer request stream. I just had to pull it up in my brain. I had it written and it was sitting right here on the desk, and then I cleaned off my desk, and it's probably over. I've got a shelf like right over here, and I just need to find out where I put it. But I've got it in my head. I just had to call it up. I'm weird like that. Okay. So Sci-Fi, I'll if you ping me on Discord, I'll actually talk to you about that a little bit, and if we need to, we can make stuff happen. I don't want you to miss that before everything else goes down. And I know you've got other things coming up with donations and stuff, and we don't have to go into that here on stream, but let me know, or just shoot me a message to remind me that I need to talk to you about that, and we'll make that work whenever. Yeah, there we go. That's what I wanted to miss. Okay, so here's what's about to happen. We pick viewer requests from viewer suggestions. So we have a poll, and what happens is that I take the number 2 winner, so like the person that came in second, or the idea that came in second, and I carry that over to this poll. But what I need from you all right now, anybody in the chat, doesn't matter if you're a follower or a subscriber or anybody, I need the first 3 decently logical concepts for anything in history that you would like to cover. So whatever it might be that you want to talk about, throw that junk in chat, and I'll just take the first 3 that come off the top. Random question. You mentioned you visited the Vatican Museum. What do you think of Italy? Italy is amazing. I quite like it. Weimar, Germany. Well, that's a good one. So just to let you all know, the one that got carried over is the Third Crusade. So we have Third Crusade, Weimar, Germany, and the Troubles. Next one goes on the list. Assuming it's not something silly like History of Butts or something like that. You know, History of the Big Toe. The Troubles refers to the period of time between the Irish Rebellion against the British in the early 1900s and the signing of the Good Friday Agreements, which stopped the violence, well, not all of the violence, but most of the violence between the IRA and the Northern Irish. Are you accurately or actually suggesting those, David, or are you just being being a David moment at the moment. You are on the list, and come a couple weeks when we do the next one, you are on the list for point redemptions. So that is coming up. Oh yeah, these are free. So we do two types of viewer requests. One of them is you pay for it and you have to spend the points and buy it. And the other one is you just name something and we put it on a poll and then everybody votes and whatever happens is what we go with. Israel Part 87 subsection B. So that would be History of Israel Part 5, I think. All right. So here we go. So here's what's about to happen. I'm about to click start a poll. This poll is going to run for 3 minutes. And everybody gets to vote. So here we go. If you look above you in the chat window, there should be a little down arrow. And that little arrow will allow you to open up the poll. And when you open up the poll, you can vote for whatever you want to. Everybody gets to vote. You do not have to be a follower. You do not have to be a subscriber. You don't have to have ever said anything in chat. If you are in the room within the sound of my voice, you get to vote. So go forth and make your opinions known. The history of Shane overanalyzing movies. That would be so long. Oh man, that would be so long. Everybody gets one vote, but we do have 20-something plus people in here, so everybody can and should go vote. Lots of votes coming in. I like this. I like seeing people getting involved. The history of puppetry. Ooh, that would be good. History of history. Joe, I could actually do that. It's called historiography. I took... do we get I voted stickers? The history of history is called historiography, which is the history of how history has been recorded. And I actually took an entire class on that when I was in college. It's one of the most challenging history classes I've ever taken. History of puppetry would have been a good one. I would have totally put that one on there. History of Midwestern folk music in the 1980s. I would have tried. I would not probably have made that one work. We would have had to tweak that one a little bit. History of candy. I would have probably done history of candy. History of cake. All right, so we've still got a little while left. There are more people in here that have voted. So we've got about 16 people that have voted, and there are more than that here. So again, seriously, you get to go vote. You really, really do. You get to go vote. Go vote. Go forth. The folk music one I made intentionally fall in its narrow scope. See, that's the thing. Like, sometimes those little narrow things are actually really fascinating, and I might have been able to make something out of that. For example, I had a really great viewer request of history of people from Norway and America. And that actually turned out to be a really fun stream. And I initially didn't know if there would be enough material for that to work, but it turned out to be really great. All right. Weimar Germany. It's the Germans. Before the Germans get here, to call back to the movie we were referring to earlier. So our next viewer request is going to be Weimar Germany. So this is the period of time between World War I and World War II, when Germany was in some real bad shape. Excellent. More German history. Yeah. Indeed. This is a good topic. I'm really excited about doing this one. I know quite a bit about this period of time. And it's one of those periods where everybody knows what happened, but I don't think everybody really understands how bad it was. I really don't think people get how bad Weimar Germany really got. It was pretty rough for a lot of people. pretty rough. All right, so we have Nix, who's redeemed the standard question book. Okay, so this is the standard question book and home study outlines. This was given to me as a Christmas present this past Christmas. It is an antique book printed in 1917, and it was the companion book to a home study history course. So you'd get all the history materials, and then this little guy told you all of the stuff that you were supposed to know by the time you finished the course. Here's the thing. I don't have the course book. All I have is this. So it's literally just a book full of questions and page references that I don't know anything about. Like, I don't have page 303 to go look up because I don't have the book. But what we do is open the book to a random page. Let's say, I don't know, this one looks kind of nice right here. Yeah, so this one. And then I kind of run my finger down the page like this, and we just kind of stop right here. And then I read this question, and if I can answer it, I answer it. And if I can't answer it, we look up the answer. All right. Yeah, I don't actually know this one. What did Eugene Sue write? Compare the birth dates of Dumas, the Elder, and Sue. Okay, so this is actually one where we're gonna have to go do some digging because I don't know who this person is in the least. So let's go to the old Google here. Eugene Sue is a French novelist. Okay. And he wrote The Mysteries of Paris. Okay. Alrighty. He was born in Paris. He was the son of a distinguished surgeon in Napoleon's army. Okay. Oh. Okay, so his dad died and he got a whole bunch of money. And then he turned that into a writing career. Looks like he wrote a bunch of stuff about naval stuff. Not naval like your belly button, but naval things like on the high seas. Oh, he was a socialist. He did not really care for the Catholic Church. And yet he then writes a book where each story represents the 7 deadly sins. So that's interesting. Okay, so what did Eugene Sue write? Bibliography. He wrote Cernacle Paret, Atargul, La Salamange, La Couracacha, Jean Cavalier, ou Les Fantastiques des Cévennes, Mathilde, Les Mystères des Paris, Les Jurons. I don't actually know what La Couracha it like. It's not cucaracha. It might be cucaracha. I don't know. Is it the cockroach? That's just it in France? Let's see. Yeah. Is this all in French? Simon Sue a capable le premier stade de front. Belmesson tout. Yeah, well, there we go. So he wrote these things. But now we're supposed to compare the birth dates of Dumas the Elder and Sue. So is this like Alexander Dumas, I would guess? He was born in 1802. Eugene Sue was born in 1804. I don't know exactly what we're supposed to know about this. Compare the birth dates. Are they born on the same day, January 26th? No, July 24th. I don't know. I don't know what the significance is here between the birth dates. But there we go. Eugène Sue, a French novelist who wrote a bunch of books about pirates and stuff. Yeah. Interesting. You want to know more about Les Fantastiques? Let me see if there was a link for that. Jean Cavalier, Les Fantastiques de Cévennes. Let's see what that is. So the name of the book is John the Cavalier, or the Fantastic of the Fantastic Les Fantastiques de Cévennes. The Miracles of Cévennes. Can I get this in English? Clearly not. Oh, so it's actually a historical fiction book based on this guy named John Cavalier, who was an illegal peasant that started killing a whole bunch of French people, French Catholics, because he had been forced to convert to Roman Catholicism, and then started a guerrilla war against the French Catholic leaders. Okay, so there we go. Even more fun stuff. Also, hey, RC Bible Nerd, good to see you. What happened to France in the 1800s? Nothing. I mean, you know, they had a big vacation. Napoleon got himself voted emperor and took over half the continent. You know. I want to know why they cast Peter Dinklage as Cyrano de Bergerac. I don't know. I did not know that they had cast Peter Dinklage as Cyrano de Bergerac. He seems like a smooth talker kind of guy to me. He basically was that when he was playing Tyrion Lannister. So, I don't know. I could see it. I think he's a good actor. Oh gosh, what's that movie? It's called the Train Depot. I've seen it once. The Station Agent. So Peter Dinklage is in a movie called The Station Agent, which is really good, and I've only seen it once, and I've been wanting to watch it again. He plays a guy that just like really likes watching trains, and gets into kind of a will they won't they relationship with a lady. It's really good, and it's got some good heart in it. Is that in the book? In this book, no. This is just questions. I would assume it's because he's a modern version. Maybe so. Maybe France was so boring it spawned those two adventure writers. Yeah, maybe so. Dinklage is big on revising work to bring fresh takes on the material. I knew that he had sort of been pushing for a lot of that stuff, and he's done a lot of stuff in stage production. Like not technically Broadway shows, but stuff like Broadway shows, like good stuff. You've heard his Cyrano movie is fantastic. I haven't seen it. I didn't even know that he was in the Cyrano movie. Is this something that came out recently, or have I just completely missed this in my life? Which is possible because I'm not, again, I don't consume all media. It just came out recently. Okay. Cool. Yeah, if it's come out last month, I definitely haven't seen it. Okay, doke. So, it is time for us to go do a raid. So, who's around that we might be able to raid? Let's see who's on the Twitch. Let me check the Discord here. And see if there's maybe any other TFK people. Or TKF people. God, I'm so bad about acronyms. For those of you that do not know, I am part of a group called the Knowledge Fellowship, which is a group of educational streamers here on Twitch. And let's see if there's anybody streaming right now that we might be able to go raid on. See if anybody's doing stuff. Do 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 do. All right. Not anything I don't know if I'm necessarily super excited about. But let's go see who's around. Who haven't we raided in a while? Did that recently. I know we just did Cave like a couple of weeks ago, or a couple of streams ago. I really need to put my raid log back in to remember who we've raided. You know what? Aristotle raided us last week. Let's return the favor. Let's just go raid Aristotle. I'm pretty excited about this anyway. I probably would end up there by the end of the night. So Aristotle is a fellow educational streamer. He's a philosopher who does sort of like a free-form discussion about various things, philosophy. He's a really great dude. Has a high tolerance for silly questions and tries to take everything at as much of a value as he can. I really love hanging out in his show. He's a great dude. So let's go raid Aristotle. Thanks everybody for coming by and hanging out. I had a really great time. I'm glad that we got to talk about some stuff that's not necessarily on the everyday, kind of list of things to discuss. The next time that you can see me for certain is on Thursday. I will be talking about the Gupta Empire and how amazing they used to be, and then they kind of went like, and then all crashed because of these people called the Huns, which kind of came out of nowhere. But yeah, we're going to talk about them on Thursday, 1900 Central Standard Time. We'll be back around. Our battle cry, as always, is adventure. And if you have any of those lovely adventure hats, you throw those in the chat when we get there. Thank you all so much for, as always, being a great audience. I really love hanging out with you all. You're awesome people. I appreciate it. I'll see you next time. Take it easy.